Welcome to the Life Success and Legacy Podcast. We're glad you're here, and we hope you enjoy the episode.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the next episode of the Life Success Legacy Podcast. I am Chris Bay, joined by two of our mics today. We've got Mike Crawford joining in and Mike Everett. Hey, guys. How are you?
Morning.
Doing well.
Good. We should do some outtakes sometimes. No, we shouldn't.
Yeah, maybe not.
The conversations that happen when we're not recording, right?
Yeah. Well,
people are always like, why do they come on so happy and chuckly?
check for live mics. That's all I got to say.
That's right. Testing.
So, Mike Crawford, thanks for pulling a couple of questions from our last boot camp. One of the ones that we thought would be worth discussing is we talk a lot of times about our clients or even ourselves being free of our outside debt. We say you're debt free in 3 to 5, 8 years on average, what that is. And typically, and we do try to scrub our language, when we're really on point, what we're saying is you are free of outside debt.
Yeah.
And people look at us kind of cross-eyed. They're like, free of outside debt. Well, if that's outside debt, then what's inside debt, right? So we wanted to today kind of unpack that, how it works, tie it back to Nelson's teaching in Becoming Your Own Banker and the phrase or the language of turning the wind current.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to lean on Mike Everett here. Mike, can you take us back to Nelson's teachings and why we focused on debt and what Nelson's thinking and what his language was about turning the wind current?
Well, if you think about it, we've got to get back to, some of the principles, obviously. Think long-term, capitalize generously, don't steal from yourself. And we'll just touch on those three for right now. Part of the thought process in the wind current is, if you think about it, and Nelson was a pilot, so he uses this example in the book. So if our plane is going this way, but we're going into a headwind, and I don't care how heavy the headwind is that slowing the plane down tremendously. So let's correlate it right back over to IBC. When he's talking about the headwind, he's talking about the debt and the interest that we are paying everybody else. But yet our brains are so situated, we've learned how to do this almost to perfection because that's what our parents did, that's what our grandparents did, that's what all of our friends do.
Yep. So
getting somebody to think differently about this whole concept of headwind and / tailwind sometimes can be like pulling teeth.
Nelson uses an example in Becoming Your Own Banker. He talks about the average American family. And he says the average American family is losing after taxes 34.5% to the interest on their debt. Crawford, okay, so even a credit card is like 20, 21, somewhere in that range. How in the world do we get to 34.5% going to interest?
Yeah, you actually explain this really well in the boot camp usually, but I'll give it my effort. The whole idea behind that number is because many of the loans that we have are amortized loans, meaning that the beginning of the term, so I don't care if it's a 5-year car loan or a 30-year mortgage, okay? The beginning of each of those terms is the heavy load of the interest side. So if you ever look at your paperwork that they send you from the bank every month or every quarter that shows the pay down on that loan, they'll show you, a few dollars going to interest, and then the rest of it's going to principal in those first several years, which is why we actually talk
reverse, right?
I'm so sorry. Yes, sorry.
Yep.
Such a little amount going to the principal and most of it going to interest. Excuse me. Thank you, Chris. But the thing about it is that we don't really ever think about it that way, right? We just see that the car payment is $500. We see that the mortgage
Got a
payment
low interest rate, right?
It's just a 3% interest rate, no big deal. But if you look at the dollars, the amount of interest in the first, I think it's 7 years of a mortgage is roughly 90% of the overall payment from the first year through that seventh year. It goes down a little bit, maybe into the mid 80s, but it's really heavy loaded on that front end because, Mike, you used to say this all the time. What do they expect you to do after about 7 to 10 years? You had a baby, refi.
Oh yeah.
Your family grew. You needed to buy a new house, or you refi,
That's
right? So
that's right.
We pick up that calculator and we hit the clear button, and it starts that cycle of payments all over again. And so, do you think the banks have something figured out on how to make money?
Yeah,
I think they do.
All this information was just killing me. True story. When our kids were getting older, and older meaning to like high school age, teenage years, those years, and we were debt free, but we were in a smaller home that didn't really have an extra space for high school kids to socialize. And Sean was working on me, and we bought a larger house for a time period. And we knew this wasn't our forever home, right? We lived in that house for 6 years. So what percentage of our payment was going to interest? So essentially we were renting that house from the bank for that 6 years, because very little of it went to principal. Now, fortunately, we were in that home during a time where housing rates went way up, like the value of homes went up. So we actually made quite a bit of money on that house.
Right.
But just in payments, we were renting it from the bank for sure. Okay, so Mike Everett, Nelson talks about changing the wind current, right? Explain a little bit about what is that changing the wind current. You were talking about the headwind, we're talking about the 34.5%. What does it mean to actually change the wind current in someone's financial life?
Well, and Crawford, he mentioned this before we got on. We have some software that'll actually show people this, but in an explanation so somebody will understand. So we've got our mortgage, we've got our car loans, we've got our credit card debt, we've got our student loan debt. That's headwind. But what happens if all of a sudden we're able to create a system to where we can literally in 3 to 5, 7 years get rid of all of that debt? So I'm just going to, everybody who's listening, we're going to do a little mental exercise here. Add up your house payment, your car payments, and your credit card debts and your student loan debts. You know what those monthly payments are. And those are required every single month for you to live life. But what happens if all of a sudden we get rid of all of that debt? And then now all of a sudden we shift the wind current. And believe me, when we start to talk to people about their outside debt, that is outside debt, but we're shifting that over to what we call inside debt. Now, go back, your mental exercise, house, cars, credit cards, student loan. Now add those payments up. And if you were making those payments to yourself, that's anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000 a month. By the way, that's $18,000 to $36,000 a year. If you were plugging those dollars back into your own system, how fast would your inside debt explode? It'd just get nuts. Yeah. But then the crazy thing is, then you get the opportunity to utilize those dollars again, income tax free. Woo.
So Crawford, can you dig in a little bit? I know we don't have the visuals of the actual software, but you can do a pretty good job of explaining. Can you, when we work on a strategy for someone and we're focused on turning the wind current, can you kind of talk through what that looks like? You do a great job of that.
Yeah, so the part that matters most in this conversation is really on the debt sequencing side, right? So when we talk about debt sequencing, the software really just organizes things in whatever order we choose, but automatically it's going to choose the least payment or the least balance, with the highest payment in an effort to change that wind current that Mike was just talking about. However, one of the things that our engineer Casey built into the software, because he's a visual person himself, right? And he figured it would be a beneficial tool. Is we built in some back-end amortization tables. So if people are putting in their information correctly, i.e. the payment amount that they're making on their credit card or mortgage payment or whatever it is, the length of the term, the balance, and the interest rate. If all of those are sort of in there correctly, the software is going to say how long it's going to take at those payments to pay those debts off. Now, in many cases, most people know like their mortgage. Okay, it was a 30-year mortgage. I'm 5 years in. I've got 25 years left, right? Those are all, that's pretty basic math. However, most people don't think about their credit cards or their, car loans and things of that nature, and how long it actually will take to pay them off. Now, yes, you may have a 5-year car note, but when you look at the amount of interest that you're paying on that car note through the amortization tables when we pay that off in the strategy, it is an eye-opening experience for many clients to see the speed at which their payments have been shifted to inside, to change the wind current. But secondly, the amount of interest, the family we worked with yesterday on our strategy sessions, I think in the 8-year window of our software, we saved them like over $55,000 or $50,000 of interest in the 8 years. The price of admission is well worth it at that point, right?
Yeah. So but they're saving that interest by paying off debt sooner than what the amortization table
more
would
efficiently.
say. Yeah. And so they're doing it more efficiently, and so they're actually saving that interest that would normally go to the bank in a normal full-term amortized loan.
Yep.
Well, and furthermore, they're recapturing those same dollars, right? So those dollars not only would have gone out the door that they never saw again, right? Because they had to pay that loan off. The interest would have occurred because that was built into the contract of that loan or that mortgage or whatever it was. So they've lost the access to the dollar for the course of the time, and they've lost the interest amount. We've helped them recapture a portion of that interest that they would have sent out the door, and all of the dollars that they were going to continue to send are recaptured and able, as Mike said, to be reused.
So Mike Everett, we've talked about this outside debt, and you always talk about the scales, right?
I do.
This outside debt, and we're shifting it to what we call inside debt. How does that happen? Like, do you just wave your magic wand and all of a sudden it becomes inside debt?
Well, let's see here. I'm going to just go right to page 35. On the bottom left-hand side column of page 35, the bottom last paragraph, it says, in September of 93, the issue of Fortune magazine did a story on economic value added, EVA. We talk about EVA a lot. But the crazy thing is, all the concept amounts to is the recognition of the fact that your own capital has a cost, as well as that which has been borrowed from banks. Okay, so I'm going back to outside debt real quick. Are these payments that you have to make every single month without fail? If you do not make them, they come knocking at your door, and they come get whatever you've got financed. I don't care if it's the car, the boat, the RV, or the house. They're going to come get whatever you've got financed.
Yep.
So if all of a sudden we've got outside debt and we're getting rid of it and we shift it over here, Nelson says that you've got to be responsible for those payments. You were going to pay them over here. And if you are owning your own system, let's see here, the name of the book is Becoming Your Own Banker. If all of a sudden you've created your own system, wouldn't you want to go ahead and continue to make those payments and be responsible for them? Nelson says that that is exactly how the system becomes self-sustaining. But so often, and I'm going to go off on a little tangent here. I'm just telling you that right now. So a follow-up story in 95 says economic value added works, but not if you make these common mistakes. So number one, they don't make it a way of life. So if you get somebody who gets rid of that outside debt and they're supposed to go ahead and be responsible over here, then we want to assist them to continue to make those payments, but yet don't we get lazy if we pay off a debt? I mean, so often we pay off this debt, and what do? We just automatically take those monthly payments and we make them part of our life. So we've got to somehow make it a way of life in order to create their own system. Most managers try to implement EVA too fast. Now we're going to make the managers spouses. One of them wants to get after it. I'm guilty of this, by the way, but yet we want to make sure that we're doing it systematically. So if you've got somebody over here who is making a $500 payment on a car and we pay off the car, but the 500 was catching them short, we're going to say, let's not make the $500 payment over here. Let's make it $250 and free up some of that, I guess, emotional baggage that we have because we're paying off all that debt. The boss lacks conviction. The boss is the one that took the lead in the IBC in the first place. So what ends up happening is we have to continue our learning. We talk about continuing our learning all the time because we as IBC practitioners, we also need to learn and grow. So that's why we read. That's why we do think tanks. That's why we do webinars. Managers fuss too much. How many of us who are in a relationship have fussed about money before? All of us. I don't care who's on. Yeah, I don't care who is listening to this. You have fussed about money with somebody, I guarantee you.
Are you talking about even since this morning?
No. That's one of our outtakes.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
But then the last one is training gets short shrift. So this is where Life Success and Legacy comes alongside all of our customers to make sure that we can do tons and tons and tons of training, but yet people have to want to be coached. They've got to be they have to want to be taught. And so part of what we've got to make sure that we're doing is we're helping people develop this mindset. It's their mindset, but yet through education, through reading, through different things that we do with the boot camps, with the webinars, with the continual coaching, they can get all the training and all the education that they want if they're willing to spend some time and energy in doing that. But that is the kind of thing that actually boosts your IBC plan. And we have a number of people, and we talk about this all the time. How many people come back to webinars and boot camps? 50, 60%.
Yeah.
Because people are jazzed up. They're dialed in. They want their system to work. We want their system to work, but it's not our system. It's their system. So
we always encourage
what we
folks. We say, hey, we are all in for you, but you've got to meet us halfway, right? We're not going to drag you to success. You've got to you got to have some skin in the game, right? You got to read, you got to learn, you got to think, you got to be engaged, you got to be an honest banker in your system. But if people are willing to meet us halfway, and we are all in, we have got so much energy for folks with that.
Yeah, and I think what we've learned is that, over the course of doing this for as long as we have as a team, we have a really good sense of who is or isn't going to be there. You know what I mean? And that doesn't mean that people can't turn around. I mean, we have folks that come in hot and then fade away, and then 3 years later circle back around. I don't think that there's any right or wrong way to do any of this stuff, but I think what's important about this specific topic here is when you can wrap your mind around that wind current. I think that is one of the most pivotal aspects of infinite banking is the wind current. Now, obviously, some folks are coming to us without debt, and maybe that's not the thing that they need to think through. But so many of our clients are coming to us with debt and needing to find that relief. And again, Mike's example of, we have a family that has a $500 car payment, but it was making them stressed every month. If we can pay that car off and only have them send $250 back to their system, are they still recapturing money? Are they a little less stressed at the end of each month with the amount of money that they have, to live life? And then that continues to grow confidence and energy. And it's that little light at the end of the tunnel that they've never seen before.
Oh, man.
Little hope that was not there 6, 8, 12 months before,
I remember back when in doing boot camps, we would sometimes ask, because we would have 50-60% of the audience would be returning folks. We would ask the audience, okay, when you turned your wind current, when you changed your outside debt to inside debt, what was your activator or input that you used for that, right? Because we still haven't really answered, okay, you've got this outside debt. On this side of the scale, how do you get it over to inside debt where you're turning those payments? And we are very clear that we don't advise on tax qualified plans, those kinds of things. We just educate and show people with our software what's possible. They make the decisions on those things. So when people are throwing out examples of what they used, I mean, for me, we used a home equity line of credit. We had some equity in our home. We used that home equity line of credit. We ran it through our IBC policy, part of it, and we attacked outside debt to turn wind current. What are some other examples, and how did you guys do it?
I started with, I left a job and had access to my 401k, and we liquidated those to get our policy going.
I borrowed money from the bank.
Not what we typically recommend.
No. In fact,
but did it work?
It did work. And, here 19 years later, this thing's just kicking tail and not taking names. So I remember when Chris first became a client, and I would say, there's no right or wrong way to do this. Now, I'm going to tell you personally, anybody who's listening, please pay attention right now. I did everything wrong.
True story.
In the early stages of my IBC plan, because when we first got involved, there might have been 40 to 60 people in the whole country that were learning this from Nelson. And man, all I wanted to do was get a bucket of money and say, let's get this thing going. So from the mistakes that we've all made, from me, Crawford, Bay, all the mistakes that we've made has really helped us to be able to be laser focused with clients on how they can utilize their system in the most efficient way.
Yeah. So we shared a couple of ways that we did. What are some other examples of inputs or buckets of money? We talk about going on a scavenger hunt where either money is going, it is not efficient, it's at risk, it's out of their control. We look at those kinds of things. Sometimes people have had cash value in a really old whole life insurance policy. Sometimes
savings account,
right?
Yeah.
And we show people lots of examples. Sometimes they're overpaying on their debt, their credit cards.
Oh man.
So there's all kinds of places that we can get access to dollars.
Yeah.
And in the vast majority of the strategies we design, we don't ask people for additional money for anything out of their cash flow. We're simply redirecting it and making it more efficient. Crawford, this example we worked on yesterday, we didn't ask those folks for any additional cash flow.
Nope.
And yet they still were able to turn their outside debt. They paid off, I think, all of their debt except the mortgage in first month.
Yep.
And then they paid off their mortgage in sometime during the third year.
Yeah.
Right? Now, here's what's interesting is, okay, so it took them 3 years plus or minus to pay off all of their debt. What that means is we shifted outside debt to inside debt.
Yep.
So now those payments that were going to somebody else and a large percentage of it was going to interest on that debt is now flowing to themselves. They're being honest bankers. They're making those payments to themselves and getting to reuse that money. Do you recall how long it took them to pay off that inside debt, which essentially, just for people who are listening, that is now in the form of a loan against your policy?
It was
That's
like
right.
12 to
So
18 months.
as we shift that outside debt to inside debt, what's happening is your outside debt is reducing, your inside debt in the form of a policy loan or a loan against your policy is increasing. So they shifted all that debt, and so they built up their loan balance in that first 3 years or so.
Yep.
And then once all that debt was paid off, now we start whittling that down. You said it took how long?
I think 12 to 18 months.
12 to 18 months for that inside debt now to be gone. So no, they no longer have outside debt, and they also don't have inside debt.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. So let's just say 5 years, down the road, they are, completely in control of their financial picture.
Yeah. They don't owe money to anybody. They didn't.
House was paid off in month 34, and their entire policy loan was paid off by month 47.
Yeah, incredible.
How many of these you want?
No, with no additional money coming from their cash
just
flow.
Using their personal cash flow that they were already spending every single month.
I try to go back to my old self when I was learning about this, and right when we say that and show that, like, your brain, the gears it is causing some problems in the brain.
I know. I was explaining to a gentleman in my Leadership Lawrence class, like a really high level, or not high level, 30,000 foot view, of infinite banking. And I did the thing Mike just did a minute ago. Take your mortgage, your student loans, your car payments, quickly add them up, round them down, round them up. I don't care. Think of the payments that you're sending out the door. If you could recapture, and I always say it this way, if you could recapture half of that amount, how much money would you have in the bank at the end of each year that you could do things with? And you could definitely see he's a thinker, and his brain just kind of went,
Yeah. That's where the drawings come in handy,
Yes.
give people that extra, visual, that extra piece.
Absolutely.
So great stuff, guys. Anything else you want to talk about or add in on the shifting? Basically, the question is, okay, if you're debt free, where's that debt going? And really what we're saying is it's going from outside debt where you're paying interest and principal to some other source. We're getting that shifted through some sort of an input activator. That's our scavenger hunt that we help you do. We shift that to inside debt, which is in the form of a loan against your policy that you now are making those payments to yourselves. You get to reuse that money, even for your premium deposit, right?
Yep.
And so that's really what happens. Just to wrap up, we've been talking about the 4 things that IBC does. Of those 4 things, we've really been focusing on just one in this podcast.
Yep.
IBC first eliminates outside debt. And oftentimes that's where we're focused when people have debt. And that's what they're telling us is, I really want to get rid of this debt. But that's just one of 4 things. The second thing is really building a pool of capital, that's cash value inside your policy, that you can use for anything you want. And that leads us into the third thing, and that is passive income. Some people use their policies for new purchases, a new vehicle. Sometimes they use it for tuition, vacations, living expenses, or investments. And that's where we lead to the passive income, where you have enough cash flow coming to you from your investments where work becomes optional. And then the fourth is the tax-free wealth transfer, which is essentially the death payout, the death benefit that pays out from the life insurance policy, because it's a whole life policy. It's going to go all the way to the point where we pass away, and that death benefit will pay out to our beneficiaries. So, all right, guys.
That's great.
Great discussion. Thanks so much for joining us. To our listeners, thank you again for tuning back into the Life Success Legacy podcast. Check us out at lifesuccesslegacy.com. We have lots of learning tools there, depending on your learning style. If you're a listener podcast, obviously, we've got several books that are good resources for you. Sign up for a webinar that Mike Everett typically does on regular basis on Monday evenings. He does that
January
live.
8th. January
Next
8th
one's
is the first
January
one.
8th. Okay. And then we encourage you to do a webinar with Mike first, and then the 3-hour boot camp, which is the deep dive. If you're an individual learner, you kind of like to go at your own pace. We also have a learning kit that you can utilize. And that includes a recording of the webinar that Mike does, as well as I think it includes a book of your choice, right?
Yep,
Comfort?
that's right.
Yep. So that's another option for people. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll catch you next time on our podcast, Life Success Legacy